Hello and welcome to Samsung. In this video, I'm going to talk about the network configuration scenarios, how the controller actually gets plugged into whether it's a managed network or whether it's an unmanaged network. When I say managed network, I mean that the switches and the routers in the network, they do VLANs, they're managed switches, managed routers, which do VLANs, they understand VLANs, and that's typically in like a proper enterprise kind of a setup, or in a setup where a customer wants to segregate, his corporate SSID and guest SSID. And then there is also the piece where a lot of our customers run into small, medium businesses who need these access points, and they just have a flat network, and they have an unmanaged infrastructure. So the switches are basically completely unmanaged. They don't have a concept of VLAN. Router is an off-the-shelf, whatever is provided by the carrier. So it's like a modem, and it doesn't have a concept of VLAN. So how do we configure the controller in that scenario? So uh, let's look at the topics that I'm going to configure, that I'm going to go through in this. So I'm going to go through a sample managed network. So what is going to happen is I have a live system here, meaning I have the controller, a managed switch, and a managed router, and we are going to go ahead and configure this from ground up. So that way you can see the whole process of how this thing is brought up, and by the end of this video we would actually have an access point configured on the controller, so you can see the whole process from the beginning. So let's start. So the first thing we are going to do is look at how the network looks like. So this is a managed network at a very high level, very very high level. Not like if you're looking at an enterprise from an enterprise perspective, obviously the network is a little more complicated than this. But for the purposes of this video, we'll keep it simple. At the same time, try and explain the concepts as well as we could. So we have the controller, and then you have a managed switch. I'm using a Samsung 24 port gigabits PoE switch here uh, for my demo. And then I have also a firewall, and as you can see from this network, they're both managed. So I can configure VLANs on the switch, and I can configure VLANs on the router. They both. So give me 1 second here. Technical difficulties. All right, so that should take care of that. So, when you look at a typical setup, the controller, in a centralized architecture where all traffic, again, I've spoken about centralized architecture versus distributed architecture in previous videos, but in a centralized architecture, the access points tunnels all traffic back to the controller. The controller basically then decides, depending upon which SSID the traffic comes in, maps it to the particular VLAN and then sends the traffic out of the controller. So it behaves like a router at that point. So in our network, I have three VLANs. So one VLAN is VLAN 10, which is used for communication between the access point and the controller. This is a VLAN which is dedicated to AP and controller, traffic management. You have to realize that all other traffic is kind of tunneled between the AP and the controller. So the user traffic is tunneled between this. So that's the whole idea. So the VLAN 10 is going to be our AP management VLAN. VLAN 20 is going to be a VLAN which is dedicated for the guest network, and then VLAN 30 is a VLAN which is dedicated to the corporate network. All right, so you can see I have a link that goes towards the internal side of the network, and then I have a link that goes towards the firewall, which basically terminates, which actually goes out to the internet. So now that being said, VLAN 10 is also going to be used for AP management. Now at this point, I want to talk about AP management. AP management is the IP address at which the access points in the network send or terminate the cap wap tunnel to. The cap wap is controlling provisioning of wireless access points. It's a tunnel that is established between the access point and the controller, and this is the tunnel on which the controller passes all the configuration data to the access point. So think of it as a communication link between the AP and the APC. And so that IP address, that 10.10.1 IP address, is extremely critical. Also, one of the things that you will realize when we go through this is that in the controller we always have to create VLANs, whether or not it's a managed network or it's an unmanaged network or whatever it is. You always have to configure VLANs, and it's very simple to do that via the GUI. So we're going to do that. So let's start off first with a controller, and this is a factory defaulted controller. So it's fresh out of the box. So you'll see how we go about configuring it. So all right, so right now what I am doing is I'm going to be consoling into the controller. So the console cable that we talked about, this is the console cable connected to the console port, and I am going to go ahead and use secure CRT, and I have a stored profile for the controller on it, and there you go. So it asks for the username. So the first time, as I mentioned in my previous video, you have to console in and change the username password. So the username is Samsung, password is Samsung. So it says you must change the current password. So I'm going to enter the current password is Samsung and my new password. So now I typically use a special character in uppercase and more than six letters to make sure that I'm fully taken care of when it comes to the new password. So that's the password policy there. Okay, so now I have access to the controller. The password has been changed. You can just run this quick command, and it will show you that the default management address, management 0, is 192.168.1.2. At this point, I'm going to configure my laptop with the IP address of 192.168.1.x domain. So let me do that here. That takes care of that. Here. So I'm going to give my laptop 192.168.10.4, sorry, 1.4, sorry. And then I'm going to have to specify any of those things right here. Now I'm going to connect a cable from the management mode to my laptop. Alright, so it seems that the cable is already connected. I should be able to ping. So 192.168.1.2, and sure enough I can ping it. So let's open a browser and get to the GUI. Okay, so this is how the GUI looks like if you haven't seen it already. So I'm going to enter the username Samsung and enter the password that I just created. Alright, so the first thing that I noticed is the monitor screen, and as you can see here, this particular controller is on the version 2.3.8 key 1. So this is actually a good thing because I want to go ahead and upgrade this. So now you can see the process of upgrading. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it to the latest version, which is 3.1.8. That is what I have. So I'm going to go here into administration and file management, APC, and I'm going to upload the APC package first. So let's do that. So upload, and then you go to desktop, WLAN, from there, and I have APC 318. That's the one that I'm going to use. So I have a VEC 8500. So this is the software for the VEC 8500. You go ahead and upload, and it's going to go ahead and upload the software. Same thing needs to be done for the access points also. So that's uploaded. So you can see that's the software for the APC. The AP package is now going to be uploaded. So that's what I'm going to do. So this is WEAFAMA is for the 300 series access points, and FAMB is for the 400 series access points. Loading file completed. AP package again. I'm going to go ahead and upload the WAFAMB. Okay. Alright, so now we have both the packages uploaded. Uh, Before you start the upgrade, make sure that the FTP and SFTP service is enabled. That's a very important thing. The reason we have to keep it enabled is because the access points essentially get their jobs using the FTP protocol. So you need to make sure that that service is enabled. The next thing is you go ahead and upgrade the package. So let's start with the APC package. You are going to select the 318 software. It does, it's checked, makes sure everything works fine. You can see that it says save and package upgrade. So that's all you're gonna do. You're gonna say apply, Samsung, whatever is the password that you have, apply. Okay, and you're gonna see this on the screen. The moment it says success, at that point, the package has been, upgraded properly. It is a successful upgrade, and then the controller reboots and then comes up. So at that point, I'm going to pause the video and wait for the controller to come up after the reboot. So it does this. So now you can actually see how long it takes for it to get upgraded. So you can see it's a success now. Now I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and the controller is going to reboot. So it does seem like the controller has come back up, and now we moved on from the 2.x firmware to the 3.x firmware, and let's see what has changed. Alright, so as you can see, when I logged into the 2.x firmware, there was no setup wizard. Uh, and in the 3.x firmware, it does give you like a setup wizard, but I'm going to skip the setup wizard. I'm going to go into each and every one of the configuration, and then once you're familiar with this, then you can probably go back to the setup wizard and configure it. So I'm going to exit the setup wizard. And let's start with the initial configuration. The initial configuration, the first thing that needs to change is by default the country settings are not set to the US, so you need to change that. But to change the country settings, the radios have to be disabled. So we need to come to the radio, to general, disable the radio, and that takes care of that. Come to 802.11 APG, general, disable the radio, and that takes care of that. Go back to the country settings. Let's change it from the Republic of Korea to the United States of America. And there you go. So that changes the country settings. So you gotta go back and make sure that the radio settings are enabled. And we'll talk about radio in a later video. that. Now you remember that the thing that we did is we've upgraded the APC firmware. We still have some work to do on the AP firmware. So I just want to make sure that the FTP, SFTP, so it disabled the FTP because with the version 3.1, what has happened is the default password now requires a much more stricter guideline. So I need to change the password. So I'm going to do it. So I'm going to Samsung 123 pound, Samsung 123. Do the same thing here. Exclamation mark. And I know there is some issues with the at sign, at least with this firmware. So be careful with that. So if you can use the same password that I'm using here, that'll be perfect. Another thing that you want to do is you want to change the time. So you can do either a system time based on your PC, or you can do. Let's just change it to the Central Standard Time. Central Time. Here you go. That's not good. There you go. So I'm going to make sure that this works. Now this is extremely critical that you change the time here. The reason being, when you install the license, it's based on a time limit, and so it does. So I would be very careful with changing the time. I would always make sure that I follow these steps. So now that that's done, let's go back to the AP firmware upgrade. So what we are going to do now is we are going to say globally we are going to upgrade any access point that connects to our controller. So if it's a 300 series access point, I want it to get the WEA 318, and if it's a 400 series, I want to get the latest firmware. So anything that connects will first look for the latest firmware and then upgrade. And you're going to see that when we plug in an access point, the first thing that it's going to do is it's going to grab if it already doesn't have the latest firmware, it's going to grab the latest firmware from it. So password is now input here. Okay, and then you can see in the advanced setting, FTP is enabled, and the default AP package should say 318R, and for the 400 it's again 318. So the important thing to remember is when you do this, select global and then quick upgrade. All right, so now that's done. Let's go back and make sure that we've taken care of a few more items here in administration. So one of the other things is you want to make sure that HTTP and HTTPS is enabled. Telnet and SSH is disabled by default in this version. I want to enable both of them. Uh, this is where you are going to change the local management user. So if you want to create a new account and you don't want to use a default Samsung account, you can do that. So there are these different types of accounts. One is for monitoring, one is for operation, one is for administration, and the other one is for lobby admin. Lobby admin account is basically for things like Captive Portal, where you have a receptionist who creates an account in advance for a guest, and they come in and they get redirected to like a portal page, and they enter those values. So we'll talk about Captive Portal in detail also in another nugget. So these are the basic housekeeping items that you need to take care of when the controller comes up. All right, so now I think we are ready to rock and roll when it comes to configuration. So let's go back to our original diagram here. Uh, let's see what we are trying to achieve. So the first things first, we have to get the network configured before we do anything. So as far as our network diagram goes, we have a VLAN 10 that needs to be configured, and that's going to be your AP management IP address. Then we have a VLAN 20, which is going to serve the guest SSID, and then we have a VLAN 30, which is going to serve the corporate SSID. All right, so let's go ahead and go into ports. I prefer to use CLI, but for the purposes of this video, I wanted to do do it via the GUI because it's also intuitive. So let's do the VLAN description. That's going to be our AP management VLAN, and that's VLAN number 10. Apply. All right. So admin status has to be up. Gigi1, and I'm going to say trunk port. So the port that is going towards the network is Gigi1. Going towards the firewall is Gigi2. So it's a trunk port. And I'll tell you why I have, there's a special reason why I have, although VLAN 20 and 30 don't need to be on this side, but I still have VLAN 20 and 30 on this side, and there's a reason for it. It's just that, it's one of these quirks with our controller that it expects the interface to have all the VLANs that are part of that are part of the network. The reason being, when you are assigning the DHCP address to the stations, it expects that these VLANs are configured as part of that as well. So that's where you just don't need VLAN 10 as part of it. You also have to have 20 and 30 as part of this trunk. So all right, so that's a trunk port. Let's go back and see what the IP address is. So the IP address was 10.10.10.1. 255, 255, 255, 0. And DHCP, you're going to say global use. You're not going to use DHCP from here. And that's it. You can, put in ACLs here. So if you want to restrict and make sure that nobody is able to connect or do, HTTP or HTTPS or this particular port is only used for CAPAP tunneling, you can specify ACLs for that. We're not going to do that for the purposes of this video. I'm going to go ahead and apply that setting here and successfully completed. That takes care of VLAN 10. Similarly, I'm going to go ahead and add VLAN 20 and VLAN 30. So this is VLAN 20 is for guests. Up. And you can see that VLAN 20 actually gets applied on both sides. VLAN 10 doesn't need to be here because it has absolutely no purpose on the firewall side. Firewall is not even aware of that VLAN. VLAN 10 is only for the purposes of access point and the controller to talk. So, but VLAN 20 and 30 need to be part of both the interfaces. So again, this is just one of those quirks that we have in the controller. All right, so Gigi1 trunk and then Gigi2 also trunk. And then specify the IP address. That's going to be 10.10.20.1, sorry, .2, and that's 255, 255, 255, 0. So let's go back here. Yeah, so .1 is the firewall. I come back here again. DNCP global use. In the case of the guest network, we are going to have the firewall assign the IP address. So that way you can see both scenarios where the controller assigns the IP address in one side, and then you have the devices getting the IP address from the firewall. So that being said, this is now applied, and then setup wizard that comes in the beginning. It does all this for you. So in like 10 steps, you are done with the complete configuration. So because we are doing this for the first time, I wanted to make sure that we go through the whole process. You go back, do the same thing with VLAN 30. That's going to be your corporate VLAN. It's 30. Let me pause the video at this point. I'm going to go ahead and configure this. Alright, so we are back. I have the VLAN 30 also configured. So now we have all our VLANs configured. They have been appropriately assigned to all the appropriate interfaces. Another thing that I want to do before we move on to the switch is doing a static route. So you have to make sure the controller is like a router. It has to have a default route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of these interfaces, preferably a VLAN 30, and go out of that VLAN as my default route. So I'm going to select 10.10.30.1 as my default route out to the internet. So that way, if I want to tomorrow access the controller from the outside, I can open up the ports on the firewall, and the firewall can point those ports towards the controller. So that's how I access it remotely. So the way to add a default route is 0.0.0.0. Mask is 0.0.0.0, and the next hop is 10.10.30.1, and distance 1. Distance is basically administrative distance, and in our case we just keep it 1. All right, so that takes care of that. So now what we have is a baseline network configured. So we've configured all that needs to be configured for the controller when it comes up. We've made sure that it's upgraded to the latest version. The next step is basically configuring the switches. So now I'm going to log into the switch, but before I do that, let's see what we need to configure there. So the port that connects towards the access point has to be an access port. This is again for people who are familiar with managed switches, who understand tagging versus untagged VLANs, access port versus hybrid ports. So again, and you can see right now I'm going to go ahead and configure these ports. So what I'm going to do is port number 1 through port number 10 is going to be an access port 10. That is going to be the VLAN on which the access points connect to. And then this port, which goes uplink towards the controller, is going to be port number 26. Oh, sorry, port number 27. And that's it. We are going to go ahead and configure it right now. So port number 27 is the trunk port. Port number 1 through 10 is access port. All right. So let me go ahead and disconnect from here, and I'm going to connect into the switch right now. Console into the switch. The console settings for the switch, for the Samsung switch is 9600 baud rate, very similar to the Cisco ones. So that's something to keep in mind, and I have a profile for those as well. So again, I come here, and then the basic username password is admin. All right, so before we do any sort of access or trunk, obviously the switch needs to be aware of VLAN 10. It doesn't have to do anything with 20 and 30. That's only a quirk on our side. So all we have to do is configure VLAN 10 on the switch, and I prefer to do it by CLI. If there's a GUI for this as well, but honestly, this is pretty straightforward. So you start with the VLAN database, and you say VLAN 10 media Ethernet state active. You can also provide a description if you want to, or name. Okay, you don't have to. You can just say enter here. And then I can, just for the purposes of managing, I can say VLAN, interface VLAN 10. I'm going to give an IP address of 10.10. The network is, the VLAN 10 network is 10.10.10.1 is assigned to the controller, so I can say 255.255.255.0, and then IP default gateway. That is interesting. Oh yeah, it's in the config settings. So IP default gateway is 10.10.10.1, which is the controller. So the controller can take you out to the internet if need be. So the default gate. What I did right now is I configured the default gateway for the switch itself as the controller. So just in case you want to access the switch remotely, also you can do that. At this point, we have the VLAN configured. One of the things that I like to do is our access point support LLDP. So you can turn on LLDP on the switch, and that makes the LLDPs enabled. And so that way you can actually which port has which access point and stuff like that, so they can talk. All right, so as per our plan, I'm going to go ahead and configure the interfaces 1/1 through 10, and then I'm going to configure this as an access port. So switch port mode, switch port allowed VLAN at 10. You can follow this step exactly like this. Switch port, say no switch port native VLAN, because by default the native VLAN is 1. Switch port native VLAN 10. Switch port mode access. Alright, so that takes care of the 10 ports. Now let's look at the uplink port. So I'm going to do the same thing here. So interface Ethernet 1 slash 27 and 28, just in case. Switch port allowed VLAN at 10. Switch port mode. There you go. So basically, what is going to happen is the access point itself sends untagged traffic, which the switch receives on the port, and then it assigns it to VLAN 10. But the controller talks tagging as well as the switch talks tagging, so they can tag that VLAN up to the controller, and then that goes up to the controller on VLAN 10. All right, so at this point, we have the switch configured and ready to go. The next thing that we are going to do is we are basically going to go ahead and configure DHCP on the controller so that the access point can get an IP. It's like a plug and play at this point. All right, so I'm going to pause the video for just a second, and then we're going to go ahead and configure the access point. All right, so at this point, we have the controller now connected to the switch, and I can ping from the switch the controller, so 10.10.10.1, and you can see that I do have a response from the server. So we are talking together, we are talking to each other. So the next step is to configure the DHCP for the access points on the controller. So what's going to happen here is when you connect the access point on the access port, it comes up and grabs the DHCP address from the controller, and at the same time, turns around and gets an option 138 and finds where the controller is. So it's a plug and play for the most part. All right, so let's go to DHCP, go to internal server, server services disabled. Let's go ahead and add the pool. So I'm going to call it AP management. The network is 10.10.10.0. Mask is 255.255.255.0. I don't need to specify a domain here. That's 10.10.10.1. And this is for the AP, so you don't need like a DNS, but I'll still specify a DNS if they want to go online. If you have another device that you would like to connect there. So. And once this is done, you see there are other options associated with the DHCP pool. So you have to specify the APC list. So this is where you're going to specify 10.10.10.1 as the APC address. That's the one that gets passed on to the to the APs. Then you're specifying the range. So I like to I like to reserve the first 10 IP addresses in the pool for static IP assignments, just in case, like the way I assigned an IP address to the switch. But you can do a range pool and begin it from 10.10.10.10. This is the range of IP addresses for your access points. So if you have more than 250 access points, obviously that scope has to be much bigger. 254. That's the last of that IP. I have this configured. I go back and turn on DHCP. There you go. So the DHCP service is now turned on. All I need to take care of now is to plug the WLAN should, if everything is configured correctly, which it seems like it is, it should come up straight on the controller. So, and you'll see on the outside, you'll see the LED turn from white when it's coming up. And the way to do it is to see if the access point is coming up on the controller. Go into configuration and look at access points, and this is where you would see it come up. Right? Seems to be it seems to be doing a red light. It seems to be showing me a red light right now. So I need to troubleshoot what's going on here. Okay, so what I see right now is a purple light, and that's telling me that it has not gotten an IP address. And the way I'm going to go ahead and troubleshoot is going to first make sure that I have the service enabled. Oh, I do want to make sure that this thing is configured as well. So, the reason it did not get a DHCP, when it's flashing purple, that means that it has not received an IP address. So, one of the things that you want to do is you have to change this parameter here in the proxy, and you have to say 1.1.1.1, and you say OK. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and it's now flashing green and red. Okay, so if I go here, I do see the access point come up. As you can see, now it's flashing green. It is flashing green. Okay. And it says down. So one thing I want to come here and see is if it's trying to upgrade the package. So administration AP. It did not upgrade because the AP was probably on the same version. So it is flashing red and green right now. Okay, so one of the things that we missed in the configuration was the AP management. The reason that we are running into this problem is the AP management interface was not configured. So this is actually a good thing. You can see that I did not configure the AP management, and the AP is not coming up. So uh, that's the critical piece. I mentioned here in the diagram that the AP management IP has to be 10.10.10.1, and I forgot to configure it. So I come here, select 10.10.10.1, make sure I hit apply at this point, and it is applied. And within a few seconds, I should see a solid green light on the AP. And boom, there you go. The AP is now showing a solid green. You can see that the access point is up on the controller. And after that, because we don't have any SSIDs configured yet, we see that the AP flashes red and blue. So the way to verify whether the AP is actually up and registered on the controller is you come here, and the first time the AP comes up, it comes up with an automatic profile name that the controller gives it. And then there is an AP name, which is basically a default generated AP name, and you can change that. uh, and it says whether it's an admin status up or down. At this point, I can unplug the AP and it would say admin status up and operational status down. But to verify whether the AP is actually up, you have to go to monitor access points, all access points, and you'll see that the cap app uptime is actually the cap app uptime is actually 55 seconds. AP has been up for the past 5 minutes because it did come up and it could not register because we had not configured the AP management IP. So the monitor AP is where you're going to come in and you're going to look at whether the AP is actually active or not. Another place to look at the activity is its summary, and you can see here that so we have a total of one access point and one of them is active. And if you have if I actually bring that AP down, if I unplug that AP, then you should see it as inactive. Go back, it's still showing as active. I'm assuming that it's still not taken. It takes a while for the keep alive to be lost. So you're gonna see in about a few minutes or a few seconds here, the access point has gone down. Right, go to configuration, the keys. It's still showing up here because the gap map keep alive has not happened yet. It's still showing up. Okay, there you go. It has gone down now. And if I come here to summary, I should see an inactive access point. So one inactive. So at this point, I can still go to configuration and look at access points, and you would see that the AP is admin up and operationally down. All right, so far in this video, what we did is we were able to configure this part of our network. I'm going to extend this to another video where we are going to talk about the network piece towards the firewall. So we have this piece configured, then we are going to configure the firewall, and then at that point, I'm going to go ahead and start configuring the SSIDs, and you'll see how that goes. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.